Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Mediation Monday. As always, I'm Alan Crone, CEO of the Crone Law Firm, along with our affiliated mediator, Dr. Jim Latta. And we're going to talk today more about mediation and how it can help you resolve your dispute, whether you're a lawyer or a litigant or just someone with a dispute with someone else. Mediation hopefully can help you resolve that dispute and move on. Jim, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Hope you are too.
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Today, we're going to talk about co-mediation and how co-mediation can help resolve impasse. I'll be very frank up front and say that co-mediation is somewhat of a novel concept. It's a cutting edge concept in mediations. Typically, in a mediation, you have one mediator, one neutral party. But in co-mediation, you may put together a team of mediators, two or more mediators, who each bring a different skill set to the mediation. And we'll talk about a little bit about how that works. Jim and I do co-mediations. I as a lawyer, he is a counselor and therapist. And we each bring different skill sets to helping to resolve a dispute, and those different skill sets amplify the ability to get a case resolved. So Jim, why don't we just dive right in? When do you think a co-mediation team is advised in a particular mediation?
I think there are several circumstances, Alan. One is when perhaps a mediation requires a set of specific skills. In mediation, mediators are reminded and held to a self-awareness that their sphere of operation in the mediation is to be a facilitator, a process monitor, a circumstance manager of the mediation. They are not judges, and they are not practicing law or practicing therapy. In my training, which you had as well, and other mediators too, I observed multiple times when, for example, attorneys begin practicing law as a mediator, the mediation failed. Or if there was a counselor trying to start therapy in the midst of a mediation. That's not what a mediator is. A mediator is called a neutral. So you have in co-mediation two neutrals who are neutral. They are process managers, but they bring specific skills to the situation. And usually these mediations are more complex, and they can be complex for multiple reasons. Multiple persons, multiple histories. For example, has a mediation failed? Is this another attempt? And just because mediation failed once, as you've said before, doesn't mean you ought not try it again. Many times people have a chance to reflect in the interim on that mediation, what they could have done differently. Their attorneys can talk to them, whatever. But I've seen mediations be retried several times and be successful, okay? So there are those types of things. Then there are parts of mediation in very emotionally complex situations. Like I find estate matters many times, probate matters, can be extremely emotional. That being said, both mediators, say an attorney and a non-attorney mediator, can compare notes, perceptions, thoughts, approaches, ways of facilitating the parties involved who are next to family law, in my opinion, and parenting plans with children. Sometimes estate probate mediations can be the most emotional out there. They can be incredibly powerful. So, because as we said, you're not necessarily mediating about things as much as memories and attachments and relationships. So sometimes co-mediation is a good thing to do. And in fact, it may be the most efficient way to do a complex mediation. If you want to try and amplify possibilities of success, and therefore limit cost and limit time and limit energy. Sometimes co-mediation brings the best of the experience of two persons, two mediators to a situation. And that has incredible effect and great usefulness in many realms, whether it's employment law or, as I mentioned, probate, estate law, multi-person mediations, which are more popular now, multiple parties, parties of four, parties of whatever. So these types of situations require probably the combined skills of both mediators who, by experience, work together well, have a good working relationship like you and I, and can communicate well, already have that down and already have that in hand to bring to the mediation for a more effective and more rapid outcome.
How do you think, can you give me an example of an impasse that might occur and how a co-mediation team might be able to more effectively resolve the impasse?
I think I can. You have mentioned it too. Sometimes in mediation processes, attorneys for parties involved have a specific place and job and task and skill to live out with their clients. And they are to actively promote their clients' well-being and legal interests, okay? But many times that does not allow for free exploration of possible solutions to a mediation conflict. And in a co-mediation, particularly with an attorney and non-attorney, which in my belief is the best combination possible, the attorney mediator can talk in caucus, in private meeting with the other mediator, the therapist mediator, let's say, about what legal maybe complications the mediating parties are struggling with, whatever that may be, not to solve it for them, but to recognize that they exist. And the attorneys maybe, because of their particular specific role as well, may be augmenting that. The therapist can bring to that conversation with the other mediator, well, I hear the emotionality being this. I hear the emotional investment and resistance being this. And have particular awareness, Alan, of the presence of both active aggression on the parties, amongst the parties toward each other, active aggression, but in my experience, passive aggression can be equally devastating. I call passive aggression a mediation blocker because it doesn't appear to be actively obstructing mediation progress, but it can be very effective in shutting down both communication and openness to explore even unthought of solutions or compromise. And so I think that we're talking about how the two mediators could work together as a team. And like any team, 2 + 2 many times equals 4, okay? In terms of the synergy between them, the mediators, and what they can bring in solutions, both from legal experience and from therapeutic experience, to say, hey, Alan, we're in this mediation. Here's what we're hearing. We take a time out. We can caucus ourselves and say, what can we do next? What do we think we need to, how do we approach this in a creative way? And I think that is a conversation between two parties who have a good relationship and professionally a good and personally good relationship. And they can put together a different way of approach or modify the mediational direction in process. They can modify that together, okay? Now, the cautionary note here is that a lawyer mediator, an attorney mediator in a co-mediation is not there to answer legal questions for the parties, nor is a therapist mediator there to answer therapeutic questions. Like, what's wrong with my ex-spouse, or whatever, or what's wrong with the other person. It's not that. It's about keeping control of mediation, moving forward, and realizing, helping the parties involved alter their perceptions of what is possible. Because as we all know, attorney or therapist or person, husband, wife, spouse, father, brother, whatever, in relationships, perceptions are reality. They are. Now, they can be misperceptions, but they are my reality. And what the mediator's job, the co-mediator's job is to put their creative experience together and to say, okay, there's a possibility here of altering the perceptual direction of this mediation. And that breakthrough can occur at any time in the mediation process. And it is so gratifying to see it, because one of the parties will say, I never thought about that. Or one of the mediators will raise a possible solution for that person to consider, that party, and they'll say, that's news to me. Can I do that? Is that doable? Is that something I ought to think about? And you can affirm that and say, well, what do you think? You play that out in terms of your own life and how that feels to you. So in terms of distorted perceptions, which give rise to mediation blockers and impasse, okay, like that family situation I mentioned last Monday, just briefly, just generally about a huge family dispute over a piece of rusted farm equipment, is not about that. It's not worth fighting over. But there were things to be settled. And let me play on that just a second, because the beautiful thing of this too, Alan, is there is the possibility, I've seen it and you've seen it, of the beginnings maybe of a reconciliation between the parties. It is possible. I'm not saying it happens or will ever happen. But if the two parties can learn, that they can solve issues together, right? Through compromise and listening and participating and offering and even taking risks to do that, I've just observed that everything's can flow from that in a positive way for them and for other people. So not to get off track on that, I'm just trying to suggest that I think that avoiding impasse gets us to the goal. In a complex mediation, you have two persons coming together whose synergy together brings that to the mediation, the creativity and the energy and the continuity to encourage to continue. Sometimes, as you well know, in a mediation, you just have to say to the parties, don't give up, keep working at it. They become tired or dispirited or whatever, or they fall back in old ways of thinking. Mind reading, for example. I know what they're thinking. I know what he's thinking. I know what she's thinking, okay? And that does become a mediation blocker, an impasse producer. And so it's important to be supportive in helping the participants with stamina. And my experience is co-mediation provides that in abundance, but more importantly, a different way of looking and perceiving what's possible. And that is invaluable. I hope that makes some sense. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think, anybody who's practiced law and been through mediations have been in mediations where the parties get to an impasse, and the great mediators are the ones who, as you say, are able to figure out, maybe what's going on behind the scenes and can move the logjam just enough that you can get around it and continue talking. And there are lots of mediators who they get to that point, they try to move, and they just throw up their hands and say, we're done. You guys aren't going to settle the case.
Yes.
I think for people selecting co-mediation teams, I think you have to look at the kind of dispute you have, as well as the kind of impasse you're likely to get. In a highly emotionally charged mediation, employee-employer mediations, maybe business partners, or even people parties to a contract, probate, family, where there are lots of emotional issues. Perhaps what you want is a therapist and a lawyer. Other situations, you might want a lawyer and an accountant.
You might.
Because what you want is a situation where you've got two different disciplines trying to solve problems and be creative to help you resolve that impasse. And so
yes, and let me say this.
Go ahead.
I would agree, but let me say this too, back to your point, yes. And actually, that can be the most cost-effective, time-effective, energy effective way of going forward. What I have noticed as well is that, as you know, if a person is a dedicated and skilled mediator, in the mediation, it is constantly being present in the moment with the people. You're always there, you're always on it. There's, you do take breaks every once in a while, but you're always thinking of where it's going, okay? You have to think ahead and plan ahead for the goal set. And, I have seen in complex situations, mediators who are very good fatigue out. I've seen them become exhausted and shut the mediation down, in my opinion, just too early. Now, there are times to shut a mediation down and let people cool off and go away and think about it and maybe come back, set a second one. But if you've got momentum, that momentum costs energy, time, money, and all kinds of blood, sweat, and tears sometimes. You can't sometimes recover that as easily as keeping it going. So with two mediators working together on the same wavelength to keep it moving forward, that is efficient and effective.
I agree. Well, again, thank you, Jim, for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching to Mediation Monday. We'll be back again soon. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Mediation Monday. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jim.
My pleasure, Alan.